The dust of the high desert road, fine as powdered bone, swirled around the stranger's worn boots as he walked into the town of redemption. He moved with a stillness that was unsettling, a quietude that clung to him tighter than his faded duster. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, took in the rough-hewn buildings, the suspicious faces that peered from behind grimy windows, but offered nothing in return. He sought only water for his horse, a place to rest his weary frame, yet his silence was a language redemption did not understand, and fear, a bitter weed, took root in the town's heart. Sheriff Brody watched him, a knot tightening in his gut. There had been whispers of trouble on the trails, a stagecoach robbed, a prospector vanished. This stranger, with his air of hidden sorrows and unspoken purpose, became an easy vessel for their anxieties. When Old Man Hemlock's small strongbox, rumored to hold his meager life savings, was reported stolen from his ransacked cabin on the edge of town, the collective gaze of redemption, sharp and hungry, fell upon the silent newcomer. He had been seen near Hemlock's claim, they said, lurking like a coyote. The whispers became shouts, the shouts accusations. He offered no defense, only that steady, unnerving gaze that seemed to see right through their bluster to the fear beneath. Mayor Thompson, a man whose ambition far outstripped his integrity, saw opportunity in the rising tide of anger, a chance to solidify his power by delivering swift, decisive justice. The stranger, nameless and friendless, was the perfect sacrifice. He fits the description of a desperate man, Thompson thundered, though no description had been given beyond shadowy figure. The seed of injustice, once sown, grew with terrifying speed in the parched soil of their fear. The stranger was seized, his arms bound, his quiet dignity mistaken for cold indifference, a chilling harbinger of the storm about to break. The trial was a mockery, held in the dusty, spittoon-stained confines of the saloon, the air thick with the stench of cheap whiskey and self-righteous fury. Mayor Thompson presided, his gavel a repurposed bung starter, banging down with theatrical finality on points that were mere assumptions. Witnesses, their testimonies coached by fear and amplified by Thompson's leading questions, painted the stranger as a villain of almost mythical proportions. "I saw him lurking near Hemlock's, eyes like a wolf," one cried, though he'd only glimpsed a figure in the twilight. "He refused to speak his name, a sure sign of guilt," another declared, as if silence itself were a confession. The stranger stood before them, a solitary rock amidst a crashing, venomous sea. His silence remained unbroken, not out of defiance, but perhaps from a weariness too profound for words, or a recognition of the futility of pleading with minds already closed, hearts already hardened. Sheriff Brody, his own unease a growing sickness in his stomach, tried to interject a note of caution. "Mayor, we ain't got no real proof." But Thompson cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Proof? The proof is in his refusal to cooperate. Sheriff, the proof is in the fear he's instilled in this good town." The crowd roared its agreement, their individual anxieties coalescing into a singular, ugly entity. It was a hunger for release, for a target, and the stranger was it. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, delivered with a speed that spoke more of panic than justice. "Guilty," Thompson proclaimed, his voice triumphant, sealing the stranger's fate with a word. The air in the saloon seemed to curdle, the brief, savage cheer of the crowd quickly giving way to a more somber, almost fearful anticipation of what must come next. The noose was already being prepared. The old oak on the edge of town, its branches gnarled like arthritic fingers, had witnessed many seasons, but none so grim as this. It was chosen as the instrument of redemption's swift and terrible judgment. The stranger was led forth, his step steady, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the jeering faces. He did not struggle, nor did he plead. There was a profound sorrow in his eyes, but no fear. As the coarse rope was placed around his neck, a hush fell over the assembled townsfolk. Some looked away, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even shame, dousing their earlier fervor. Others watched with a morbid fascination, their faces hard. Mayor Thompson, puffed with importance, read the sentence, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. The stranger's lips moved then, just once, a whisper lost to the wind, perhaps a name, perhaps a prayer. Then the signal was given. The horse was slapped, and the stranger's body swung, a pendulum marking a moment of irrevocable darkness. It was over quickly, too quickly. As the crowd began to disperse, a morbid silence replacing their earlier clamor, young Timmy Evans, the blacksmith's boy, who had been lingering at the edge, drawn by a grim curiosity he now regretted, saw something fall from the stranger's rough-spun pocket. It glinted dully in the harsh afternoon sun. Timmy, small and unnoticed, crept forward. He picked it up. It was a piece of metal, tarnished and worn, but its shape was unmistakable. An army badge. He stared at it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a cold dread seeping into his young soul. He didn't know what it meant, not fully, but he knew with a child's unerring instinct that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Timmy, his small hand clutching the heavy, cold metal, ran as if the devil himself were at his heels, not towards his father's smithy, but towards the sheriff's office. He burst through the door, breathless, tears streaming down his dust-streaked face, and thrust the badge into Sheriff Brody's hand. It fell from his pocket, Sheriff. The quiet man, Brody, who had retreated to his office, the grim proceedings having left a bitter taste in his mouth and a hollowness in his chest, took the object. He turned it over in his calloused fingers. The tarnish of years could not obscure the eagle, the shield, the unmistakable insignia of the United States Army. It was not just any badge. It was a decoration for valor, perhaps even a symbol of significant rank, earned in service, in sacrifice. A wave of nausea washed over Brody. This was no drifter, no common cutthroat. This was a soldier, a man who had likely faced horrors far greater than any in Redemption, only to meet his end at the hands of a fearful, misled mob. The sheriff's mind raced, replaying the hasty accusations, the flimsy evidence, Mayor Thompson's arrogant pronouncements. The stranger's silence, once perceived as guilt, now seemed like the stoicism of a man who had seen too much, perhaps one who had lost the will or the words to defend himself against such petty, cruel injustice. "What have we done?" Brody whispered, the question echoing in the sudden, crushing silence of his office. The weight of the badge felt like a millstone, dragging him down into a pit of dawning, sickening realization. The town hadn't just hanged a stranger. They had extinguished a life that had, in all likelihood, been dedicated to protecting the very freedoms they had so casually, so brutally, denied him. The badge lay on Sheriff Brody's scarred wooden desk, a silent, damning accusation. Sleep offered no escape that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the stranger's quiet face, the unwavering gaze that now seemed to hold not guilt, but a profound, weary disappointment. The cheers of the mob, the crack of the gavel, the creak of the rope, all replayed in his mind, a tormenting symphony of injustice. He, John Brody, sworn to uphold the law, had stood by, his objections too weak, his courage too small, and allowed an innocent man, a hero perhaps, to be murdered. The word murdered seared his conscience. This was no execution. It was a lynching, born of fear and orchestrated by ambition. The next morning, Brody walked through Redemption with new eyes. The townsfolk he had known his whole life seemed different, their faces shadowed by a collective, unspoken guilt or perhaps, for some, a hardening of their misguided certainty. Mayor Thompson, however, preened. Accepting congratulations for his strong leadership, Brody felt a surge of cold fury. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the strongbox theft, the catalyst for this tragedy, needed a second, harder look. The stranger's silence had been his undoing, but Brody would now give him a voice. He owed him that much. He owed it to the badge, to the uniform it represented, and to the tattered remnants of his own honor. The investigation wouldn't be easy. He would face resistance, ridicule, perhaps even danger, from those who wanted the matter buried, from Thompson who would see it as a challenge to his authority. But the image of the stranger, and the weight of the badge, fortified his resolve. He would find the truth no matter the cost. It was the only redemption possible, not for the stranger, but for himself, and for the soul of the town. Sheriff Brody began his grim task at Old Man Hemlock's ransacked cabin. The initial investigation had been a cursory affair, driven by the desire to quickly blame the stranger. Now, Brody examined every scuff mark, every overturned piece of furniture, with meticulous care. He was joined, unexpectedly, by Doc Weatherby, the town's physician, a man of quiet wisdom and keen observation, who had also been deeply unsettled by the hanging. "Never sat right with me, John," Doc said, his voice low. "That stranger had the hands of a worker, maybe a soldier, but not a thief. And his eyes, well, they'd seen too much of real trouble to bother with a paltry sum from Hemlock together. They pieced together a different story. The ransacking was too theatrical, too deliberate, as if staged." Hemlock, when questioned again, away from the intimidating presence of Mayor Thompson, admitted the strongbox contained mostly sentimental trinkets, not the fortune Thompson had insinuated to inflame the crowd. More tellingly, Hemlock recalled seeing someone else lurking near his property days before the stranger even arrived, a shifty character known for his gambling debts and his association with one of Mayor Thompson's less savory business partners, a man named Silas Blackwood, who stood to gain if Hemlock was driven off his land, which had a hidden spring. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far uglier than simple fear. It smelled of greed, of a calculated plot where the quiet stranger was not just an accidental scapegoat, but perhaps a convenient distraction, or even a victim specifically chosen for his inability or unwillingness to fight back against a rigged game. The truth was a serpent, slowly uncoiling, its fangs aimed at the heart of redemption's supposed respectability. The evidence mounted, a grim testament to a conspiracy more rotten than Brody had initially feared. Silas Blackwood, when confronted with Hemlock's corrected testimony and the inconsistencies at the cabin, crumbled quickly under Brody's steely questioning. He confessed to the ransacking, admitting he'd been hired by Mayor Thompson himself. Thompson's plan had been twofold: to discredit Hemlock and drive him off the land with the valuable spring, and to use the ensuing fear to solidify his own power by resolving the crime swiftly, with the stranger as the perfect, silent scapegoat. The stranger's arrival had been an unfortunate coincidence for him, a perfect opportunity for Thompson. The confrontation with Mayor Thompson took place in the town square, the shadow of the executioner's oak looming nearby. Brody, with Doc Weatherby and a now remorseful, trembling Hemlock by his side, laid out the facts, his voice clear and unwavering, for all of redemption to hear. "This town didn't hang a thief, Mayor," Brody declared, his gaze locking with Thompson's. "This town, under your deceitful guidance, murdered an innocent man, a soldier. And you did it for greed, for power." Thompson blustered, denied, threatened. But the faces of the townsfolk, once supportive, now reflected dawning horror and betrayal. The badge pinned to Brody's own chest now, over his star, seemed to radiate a righteous authority that Thompson's sputtering rage could not overcome. The arrogance drained from the mayor, replaced by a desperate, cornered fear. The crowd, silent and aghast, began to murmur, the sound growing from a whisper to a low growl of anger, no longer directed at a silent stranger, but at the man who had so thoroughly, so cruelly, deceived them. The tide had turned. The full weight of their collective actions descended upon the people of redemption. The square, once the scene of their righteous fury, now bore witness to their profound shame. Mayor Thompson, stripped of his authority and his false dignity, was taken into custody by Sheriff Brody, the murmurs of the crowd now sharp accusations. There were no cheers this time, only a heavy, suffocating silence filled with unspoken remorse. Some wept openly, the faces of men and women alike etched with the horror of their complicity. They had been so easily led, so quick to judge, so eager to extinguish a life in their fear. The stranger's quiet dignity in the face of their barbarity now haunted them. Doc Weatherby addressed the somber assembly, his voice gentle but firm. "We cannot undo what has been done," he said, his gaze sweeping over their bowed heads. "A good man, a man who likely served this country, died because of our fear, our prejudice, and our willingness to be manipulated. The guilt is ours to bear. There was no dissent, only the shuffle of feet, the averted eyes. The town had to reckon with itself, with the darkness that had lurked beneath its surface. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a period of introspection and painful awareness. Each citizen had to look inward, to confront the part they played, whether through active participation, fearful silence, or willful ignorance. The name of the town, Redemption, once a proud declaration of second chances for its founders, now felt like a bitter irony, a challenge they had catastrophically failed, and a goal they must now desperately strive to reclaim, if such a thing were even possible after such a grievous sin. The path ahead would be long and arduous, paved with the stones of their regret. The first step towards atonement was the hardest. Under Sheriff Brody's solemn guidance, the townsfolk of Redemption made a decision. The stranger, whose name they might never know but whose sacrifice they would never forget, deserved more than an unmarked grave. They chose a peaceful spot on a small rise overlooking the town, a place where the morning sun would touch first and the evening light would linger. With their own hands, they built a simple, dignified monument of local stone. Carved into it were not accusations, but words of sorrow and a vow. To the unknown soldier, hanged by injustice, may we learn mercy and seek truth. The army badge was carefully encased within the monument, a permanent reminder of his service and their failure. The old oak, the instrument of their crime, was cut down. Its wood used to build a new bench for the town square, a place for quiet reflection rather than rash judgment. Mayor Thompson was tried, not by a mob, but by a circuit judge, and sentenced according to the law he had so blatantly disregarded. Silas Blackwood, too, faced justice. The process was slow, painful, but necessary. Sheriff Brody, with Doc Weatherby at his side, began to institute changes. Town meetings became forums for open discussion, not pronouncements. Strangers were met with caution, yes, but also with an attempt at understanding, a deliberate effort to listen before speaking, to inquire before accusing. The memory of the quiet stranger became a touchstone, a somber guide for their collective conscience. Redemption was no longer just a name. It was a daily act, a conscious choice to be better, to honor the life they had so wrongly taken by ensuring such a tragedy would never stain their town again. It was a fragile hope, nurtured by shared grief and a newfound humility. Centuries flowed like the river in the valley below, washing away the raw edges of grief but not the deep inscription of memory. The town of Redemption, against the odds of its scarred beginnings, did not wither and die, nor did it forget. It thrived precisely because it remembered. The story of the quiet stranger and the army badge became a foundational legend, passed down through generations not as a tale of shame to be hidden, but as a solemn lesson in humility, justice, and the perils of fear. The monument on the rise became a pilgrimage site, a place where children learned about the courage it took to admit a wrong, and the strength required to build a community on the bedrock of true fairness. The town became known throughout the territories, and then the states that followed, as a place where the law was revered not just in letter, but in spirit, where a person was judged by their character, not by their silence or their unfamiliarity. Sheriff Brody's descendants continued to serve with integrity, the tarnished badge of the unknown soldier replicated and worn by each new lawman as a reminder of their ultimate duty. The spirit of Doc Weatherby's quiet wisdom infused the town council. The fear that had once choked Redemption was replaced by a resilient vigilance against prejudice. The legacy of that terrible day was not darkness, but a hard-won light. The quiet stranger, nameless in life, had, in death, given the town its truest, most enduring name and purpose. Redemption, now a beacon of justice and compassion, stood as an everlasting testament to the profound truth that even from the deepest injustice, if confronted with courage and an unwavering commitment to atonement, a legacy of honor and lasting peace could, indeed, be forged, echoing through the ages.